Hey, I'm Jolt. Welcome back to the Sketch Your Mind conference recordings. We are now at session 11 out of 16, and this one features Jorge Arango, information architect, author, and educator. If you're new to the series, you'll find all the resources linked below, including the big Excalibur whiteboard where I'm collecting notes from every session. Jorge has also shared his presentation slides. You'll find the link in the description on the whiteboard and on the conference site. And now a quick personal note. Posting these videos takes quite a bit of time. I've been releasing one every other day, and honestly, it does pull me away from other projects. So if you're enjoying these sessions, then please hit like, share them, and drop a comment below. It really helps with motivation and visibility because I think these talks, including Jorge's, are pure gold. Yet surprisingly few people seem to stumble upon them. In this session, Jorge shares his process for writing nonfiction, breaking it into 3 stages: research and incubation, structuring, and writing. When I wrote Sketch Your Mind, I did the entire process in Obsidian MD. I'll link the playlist in the video description. Jorge's approach is different. He uses a dedicated tool for each phase, arguing that switching environments can boost clarity and flow. It is a nice, practical reminder that the tools we use shape how we think and create. At the end of the video, you'll hear the music I composed for this session. If you'd like to support my work, you can get the conference album, join the next visual thinking workshop, grab my book, Sketch Your Mind, or try the Obsidian Excalibur plugin. All the links are in the description below. And now?
I'm an information architect, and I also consider myself an author. I've written some books, and whenever I am talking with someone and I say, that we get into the subject of books, and they find out that I've written books, I often hear things like, "Oh my gosh, writing a book! Well, I couldn't do it. That is so hard, right?" And there's this cliche that writing is kind of like tortured work where you're sitting and like sweating it out, right? And always in those conversations, I tend to disappoint folks because for me, the book projects have actually been really enjoyable. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that I tend to be fairly disciplined about things, and I do think that you need a bit of discipline to do this well. But also a big part of it is because of the process and tools that I've used to do this. And those I think anyone can use. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. So again, Zolt already mentioned this as part of the introduction, but I always introduce myself as an information architect, author, and educator. And when this author thing is a big part of my professional identity. I've been writing about information architecture for over 2 decades at this point. I have a newsletter where I'm often writing about these subjects, and I've worked on these 3 books. I am going to share visual thinking techniques that have helped me write them. But to be more specific, I'm going to be talking primarily about the 2 most recent books, so Living in Information and Duly Noted. And the reason for that is the information architecture book was a 4th edition of an existing text. So that had a slightly different writing process, and it's one that I don't think is very typical for a lot of authors. So I think a lot of authors are going to follow something more like the process I followed in the 2 newer books, which were net new, right? They were kind of started from scratch. I am going to focus most of my comments here on the latest book, Duly Noted. It's not just because it's the freshest in my memory. This book came out in January of last year, but it's also because what I'm going to be talking about is the subject of the book itself. And even though the book is focused on note-taking in particular and managing a note-taking system, the bigger picture message there is how to think more effectively with things. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. But even though I am going to be focused primarily on the examples I'm going to be showing are from this book, I also use the same approach for living in information as well. So before I get into the examples and the processes, I do have a little bit of kind of theoretical level setting here. The main message, like if you want to take anything away from this presentation, is that we think with things. And what I mean by that is that we leverage the world outside ourselves, right? Us, to extend our minds. The clearest example of that, I think, is when you're out and about in the world. Maybe you're in a shopping expedition, or you're in a meeting or something, and someone says something, or you come across something that you want to remember later. Like one of the things that we do is we'll pull out our phone and open the notes app and like take a note, or you'll jot down something on a piece of paper, or like my daughter did here, lacking paper, you write it on your hand, right? Like you want to remember this thing later, and you know that if you don't write it down, it might slip. It might slip your mind, especially if you're distracted or busy or what have you, right? In all these cases, what is happening is you are leveraging things in the world to extend your memory, right? So you're using things like the notebook, your phone, or in this case, the skin, as a way of like a prosthetic memory that extends your cognitive abilities. Of course, memory is not the only thing that we extend through things. We do other types of thinking with things as well. If you've ever used something like a mind map, for example, to plan out a project, you will know the power of putting pen to paper and just drawing out your ideas. And this isn't just about recording thinking that is happening in your brain. This is there's a feedback loop that starts happening when the lines start emerging on the page, and your eyes perceive them, and you start elaborating the ideas, right? Like that's the power of something like a mind map, that it is extending your mind in that way. And these kinds of drawings, these kinds of diagrams help you think more effectively than if you were just trying to think about things using your brain. So the big takeaway here, the key here, is that there is more to thinking than the brain. We do leverage things outside of our brain. Thinking is actually a process that emerges as your body, including your brain, interacts with things in the world. So, this idea that we think with things. The fact that we think with things is really great news for us, because we are limited to the gray matter we were born with, right? Like the brains that we have are the brains that we have. And there's only so much that we can do to expand our cognitive abilities through our biology, right? But if it's true that we can think with things, then you can endlessly improve your environments and tools to help you think better. And that's the whole point of something like the examples I'm going to be showing here, which is tools for thinking, right? Tools for thinking for this very particular use case, which is writing a book. And I'm going to be talking about what I think of as 3 distinct stages in the writing process. And here I'll have to make a disclaimer right up front. All the books that I've worked on are nonfiction books. This might be a little bit different if you are writing fiction, although I suspect that many of these tools might also be valuable for fiction writers. But I think of this as happening in 3 stages, right? So first you do research, then you structure what you found, and then finally what we think of as writing proper, the sitting down in front of a keyboard and clacking out words. I think that one of the reasons why so many people struggle with writing is that they think of all of these stages as being like the writing process, and they think that writing tools are things like Google Docs or Microsoft Word. They think it's like, if I'm going to be an author, I have to use those tools. And I don't think that that's right. I think that each one of these stages requires different tooling. So let's start with the research process. And I'm using the word research here, but I really mean kind of like the incubation as well. Like, you have these early ideas about what you want to be writing about, and you start reading up on them or watching YouTube videos, doing the investigation to deepen your grasp of the materials that you're hoping to write about. Eventually, if you do this enough, you will determine whether this is actually worth writing about. You may get excited, right? Like, you may discover, oh my gosh, there's something here, right? And you start doing more and more and more of this, and you start hitting the sort of cognitive limits that where extending your mind would be beneficial, right? So we do things like use notebooks, and this is from one of my shelves. So I use paper notebooks, bound notebooks, and I have been doing that for a long time. And these are really fantastic. Paper, we don't underestimate pen and paper, right? Like, pen and paper have tremendous advantages. They are great at jotting down things quickly. There's no boot up time. There's no software updates. Notebooks can't get bricked unless there's a fire or something. So these are a really powerful way of writing down what you're learning. The challenge, though, with something like a book project, particularly if you use bound notebooks like these, is that you will be collecting ideas that aren't yet don't yet have any clear relationship between them, and you want to be able to access them quickly. And linear notebooks, like these, do not provide easy means for random access. So you have to maintain something like an index. So if you want to be able to get back to the ideas when you're actually going to start doing things like sequencing them. People have struggled with this problem for a long time, and they've tried different approaches to solving it. This is a device from the 17th century called Harrison's closet, which allowed scholars to store individual ideas in slips of paper with an index that they could go back to. And this is mostly like a theoretical artifact. There are examples of people who actually built this, but as you might imagine, these things are quite they're quite clunky, right? Like, they take up space, and they do have a lot of manual organization that needs to happen. People today still use paper for this kind of thing, primarily as index cards. If you're familiar with the work of Ryan Holiday, who writes about Stoicism, or Robert Greene, the author of the 48 Laws of Power and those books, they're famous for using index cards and these elaborate boxes for each book, right? And if you have spent any time in the personal knowledge management space, you will have heard about Zettelkastens, the most famous of which is one by a German scientist named Niklas Luhmann. He, at the end of his life, he had these enormous pieces of furniture with all these index cards, right? So those are attempts at solving this problem using cards. But again, you have to keep track of where things are. We do have digital tools now that can do this much more efficiently and effectively. That's the role that tools like Obsidian and DevonThink and Rome Research play. I'm particularly fond of Obsidian. It's what I use primarily. It's what I wrote about in Duly Noted. These are tools that are designed to make that process easier, and with a little bit of mindful organization, bottom up, tagging, stuff like that, then you can make it so that you can go back to your ideas really quickly. I'm not going to belabor this. This is what Duly Noted is about. So if you're interested in this part of the process, then check out the book. But what I do want to focus on today is this second stage, which is where you take this set of ideas that you have been gathering for all this time, and you start organizing them in such a way that you can explain them to other people. And this is a real challenge, and it's where a lot of people get stuck, primarily because they think that the way to go about writing a book is to go from the research stage directly to Google Docs. But what the image that comes to my mind is like at the end of the research stage when working on one of these books, I feel like I'm looking at a table covered in like jigsaw puzzle pieces, and I don't have the picture that the jigsaw puzzle is supposed to make. And I don't even know if these pieces all belong to the same puzzle, right? Or I might be missing pieces. And it feels like, oh my gosh, where do I start? It's so overwhelming. And I think that this is where a lot of folks become stuck. As with the research stage, people have used approaches to solving this problem with paper. I interviewed another author, my friend Gretchen Anderson, for my podcast, The Informed Life, when she was writing a book. And she described how she used the walls in her family's dining room as a space to put up sticky notes when she was figuring out how to organize the ideas in the book, right? The author, Robert Caro, who's written these amazing biographies of Robert Moses and Lyndon B. Johnson, he uses the walls in his office, and he puts up the pieces of his whatever chapter he's working on, so that he can visualize them almost like a storyboard, right? And this allows them to move things around. So there are ways of doing this with paper. Paper is very convenient for many of the same reasons as notebooks are, but it also has limitations. One limitation is that it's really hard to get a wall that is big enough. If you're working on a book, and I'll show you some pictures now, you might end up with a lot of sticky notes, and moving them around and keeping everything up at the same time could be challenging. And writing a book takes a while, right? This could be a year-long process, maybe 2 years. And are you really going to commandeer your family dining room for that amount of time? Like, it might not be, it might not make the other folks in your household happy. So I like digital tools for this. My preferred tool for this stage in the process is Tinderbox, which is it's an amazing note-taking tool. It's a pro-level tool, meaning it's expensive and it has a steep learning curve, but it gives you basically an infinite canvas where you can put up these notes, and they look like, they can look like sticky notes, but they have superpowers in that each sticky note here has metadata, so it can have attributes, so that you can do things like tag it, you can link it to other notes, you can start writing notes about the note itself. And this is a screenshot from Tinderbox when I was about halfway through the process of working on Duly Noted. And at this point, like, I had taken all I had started taking all these ideas that I'd been gathering and just putting them up, and then gone through the sort of clustering exercise that you would do with sticky notes. So the yellow notes here represent individual ideas, and I've already clustered them, as you can see, and the orange sticky notes represent like section headings. So I'm starting to group them and think, well, this might be a little section. And you'll also notice these vertical gray bars in the background. Those are groupings for what are starting to emerge as chapters, right? So this is a snapshot in time. And again, it's pretty far forward in the process, but this came after a lot of experimentation. And what this allows me to do is, having gone through the research stage, I now have this like bird's eye view of everything, and I can locate. It's like, well, I have this one anecdote here, and that belongs in chapter 7 because chapter 7 is going to focus on this, right? And this is a way for me to start visualizing the entirety of the book at a very high level, right? So that I am not lost in the details. The other thing that this does, which I find invaluable, is that it gives me a sense of where I need to do more work. Even though I showed you the 3 stages as like this linear thing, the lines between them are kind of blurry. Like when you get into the structuring stage, you might realize that, hey, I'm missing stuff. So if you look carefully here, you'll notice that chapters 7 and 9 have fewer notes than the previous chapters. that is a signal to me that I need to do a bit more work on those. I might need to go back to the research phase and read up, or maybe form a position on how the subjects that are going to be tackled in those chapters can be most meaningfully developed in the context of everything that has come before. So this, I want to emphasize, like, this is a very different way of working on a book than sitting in front of a blinking cursor in a word processor. The blinking cursor is really powerful when you're actually writing, but at this stage in the process, I'm not writing. I'm trying to get a sense of how the story flows and what are the components of the story. This is the board for Duly Noted when I produced the first draft. At this point, I had started writing some of the earlier chapters that were more complete, been sharing them with my editor, getting feedback. We got to the point where we had a first draft. At that point, I actually started over. I started this visual layout process over with a different tool. And the reason for that is I wanted to include this step in the process in Duly Noted itself. And like I said, Tinderbox is a pro tool with, it's expensive and it has a steep learning curve. And I wanted a tool that was more accessible to readers. So I did something similar using Freeform, which if you are a Mac user or an iPad user, Apple makes available some applications for free with their devices, and Freeform is one of them. But this is kind of like Mural or Miro or FigJam, right? It's one of these infinite canvas tools where you can add sticky notes. And what you're looking at here is the visual layout of Duly Noted as I was working on the second draft. And you'll notice that there are a lot fewer notes here than in the previous version. And the reason for this is, at this point, I already had a sense of what the chapters were going to be. I had this kind of like big picture, like how are the ideas going to flow? What I wanted to work on here was the rhythm, the cadence of chapters themselves. So I, as a reader, I appreciate when chapters have an expectable cadence where like they establish a rhythm, they have a similar word length, so that I can get a sense of how I'm progressing with my reading. And I feel kind of at ease as a reader when I feel like an author has done that work. So that's what I was looking for here. And let me explain to you how this board works. So in this one, the columns represent chapters like the previous one, but the rows are what I think of as like beats in each chapter. So I was aiming for a similar word count in all of the chapters, and each of these beats is a little section inside the chapter that is going to have is going to do a particular role. So the gray sticky notes represent framing questions. These are the questions that chapter is seeking to answer. And I was imagining this as though I was having a conversation with the reader. It's like, what question would the reader have upon entering chapter 2 if they had finished reading chapter 1, right? By the way, I would imagine that if I were doing this today, I would use something like ChatGPT to help me formulate these questions. But at this point, I was not using those tools yet. This was written before ChatGPT came out. But that's what those gray ones are. And those set the tone for the entire chapter, because everything that follows should be in service to answering those questions. The magenta sticky notes represent stories. So I wanted to open each chapter with a story that was informative in that it set the stage for what the chapter was going to be about. But I also wanted them to be engaging and entertaining, and a relief from like the monotony of reading, just ideas about note-taking or what have you. So it's like, make the subject come alive, right? So I wanted each chapter to open with a story. The blue sticky notes represent the key ideas. So the concepts that need to be elaborated to answer the focusing question. And the green sticky notes represent exercises. So I wanted this to be a practical book that someone could put next to their computer as they were using a tool like Obsidian. And and the book is written around Obsidian as the note-taking tool. So I wanted to synchronize those exercises so that they helped illustrate the ideas for each chapter. You will also notice that some of the little boxes there are not notes, they are pictures of people. And what those are is I wanted to have other voices in the book. So it wasn't just me talking about how I do this. And I wanted to include other note takers, other people who took notes. And I interviewed a bunch of folks. I also did research on people who lived a long time ago, or some people who have written about their note taking process. So that's what those represent. You will also notice that some of the stickies are empty. So I know that I need that beat in the chapter, but I haven't come up with an idea yet, right? And this was really useful to me as a catalyst for writing, because one of the worst things that you can face as an author is sitting down in front of a blinking cursor and a blank screen and not knowing what to write about. And this tool gave me the ability to always sit down with something to write. And the analog for me here is the periodic table of the elements. I mean, if you remember this from school, this is how we organize the elements. And when I was in school myself, I had always assumed that this artifact had been around forever. But this is a design thing. This wasn't around forever. It was created in the mid-19th century by this Russian chemist, Dmitry Mendeleev. And at that time, there were already a bunch of elements that were known, but people, scientists would organize them based on their atomic weight, which was known. So it was like a linear progression. And Mendeleev did this thing where he actually put each element in like note cards, kind of like what we were talking about, right? Like index cards. And he started like moving them around because he had this hunch that some of the attributes seemed to be repeating, right? So he was trying like different combinations to see how he might organize this to establish the patterns, right? And the big breakthrough was when he recognized that what was happening was that he was missing some cards. So when he built out the matrix of cards, leaving some spaces for elements that were unknown at the time, then this periodic sequencing became unlocked. And it was a very powerful artifact, to the point that Mendeleev was able to predict elements that would be discovered later. And he was able to predict not just their attributes, but how they would interact with other elements in the table. So when I'm doing this work, I feel a little bit like that. It's like I've set up this structure that that leads me to predict what the shape of the book is going to be, even if I don't know exactly what each section is going to include. So that when I do sit down later at a word processor, I'm not facing the blank screen with the blinking cursor. And that leads me to the last stage, which is where you sit down in front of the word processor, right? And I think that many of us do this using tools like Microsoft Word or Google Docs, like I've said already. And those are fine. Like, you can use this process as long as you've done the structuring. I'm sure that you can sit down at Google Docs and start doing this work, right? Because they're pretty good tools. That said, there are writing tools that are better suited to this kind of approach. I'm going to mention the two that I am familiar with. The first you might have heard of, it's Scrivener. This is recommended by a lot of authors. And the reason why people love this tool is that it allows you to work at different levels of granularity. So you can focus on a single section, and you end up having these collections of sections rather than this monolithic text, which you can rearrange in various ways. It even has this note card view, which allows you to see things at higher levels and move them around. So that's why people love Scrivener. It is a good tool. I tend to prefer another tool called Ulysses, which has some of the same advantages of Scrivener, even if it doesn't have that neat note view. But the main reason why I like Ulysses better is that it natively works with Markdown, which is how I write everything. I keep everything as Markdown. So it's more of like a technical consideration for me. But the other reason why I like Ulysses is that it makes it very easy for you to assign word count targets for sections. And I know that Scrivener does this as well, but I just like how Ulysses does it. I don't know if you can tell there in the panel on the left, there are these circles that are, some are green, some are red, one is gray. And those are indicating like whether I'm close to the word count target for each one of those chapters. And I find that really valuable and also motivating, right? To be able to know how much I have left to go. So the key takeaway here is the authoring process isn't monolithic, and it isn't about sitting down in front of a word processor, right? Like researching is different from structuring is different from writing, and each one of those stages calls for different tooling. And when I say tooling, I don't just mean software, right? Like I also mean these kind of conceptual tools. If you're doing research, it's like, how are you storing your information? How are you storing the stuff that you learn so that you can easily recall it? In the structuring phase, it's about these kind of periodic tables that give you hints about how the book should be laid out and sequenced. And then writing is more the kind of traditional sit down in front of a blinking cursor thing. So I'm just going to wrap up here with 3 takeaways. And this is if you don't remember anything else, this is what you should take away. We think with things, right? And that's really powerful. So if you're going to write a book, spend time thinking about how you can configure your environment, meaning not just the room you're in, right? And yes, make it like a quiet room, but not just the room you're in, but also the tooling, right? Set it up so that it supports your efforts. Second takeaway, don't jump straight into the word processor. Think about the structure of the thing. Think about how the story you want to tell needs to unfold so that it makes sense to your readers. But be flexible. Remember, you're not stuck in this linear process. You're going to be going back and forth. I mean, pretty late in the writing of Living in Information, we switched a chapter. I think it was like chapter 8, and we moved it to like to be the second chapter in the book. Like those kinds of things happen. So be open to doing that. But do consider the structure, because that really helps unlock the writing process. And then the final point here is one that I haven't touched on a lot so far, but I do think it's very important. Every time that you change from one of these modalities to the other, you get the opportunity to slightly rethink what you're doing. So, you've heard the advice is like, well, if you're feeling stuck, just go outside and walk around, hopefully in nature for a little while. And all of a sudden you get all sorts of ideas. Well, I find that when I switch modalities, when I go from like Tinderbox to Freeform, or from Freeform to Ulysses, or even like from Ulysses to the Substack editor, I'm looking at the same text and it's like, oh my gosh, why didn't I consider that thing, right? So it unlocks your mind. Like you can become stuck in these tools. So switching modalities can be very helpful. All right, I'm excited to hear what questions you'll have. I wish you much success and happy writing. So let's jump into the questions. And I do see questions.
You need any help with that, or you're happy to go with the questions?
Well, have you pre-read them, Zolt? Are there any that
They
are
are
like
they are ranked.
really?
So I think at the top, Ivan's question, "What is an information architect?" is a good place to start. That I encourage everyone to upvote the existing questions so we see the level of interest as well.
Okay, an information architect. So this is, if any of you have seen the very first Star Wars movie, there's a line that Obi-Wan Kenobi says when giving Luke Skywalker the lightsaber. He says something like, "It's an elegant weapon for a more civilized age." Information architecture, I think, is a little bit like that. Information architecture is I think of it as a design discipline, and basically, it is structuring information to make it easier to understand and use, so that people can do stuff with it. So you make it easier to find, understand, and use. And that manifests in structuring websites, for example. Like if you've ever gone on an online store and immediately found what you were looking for, and I had just an excellent experience in finding related things and being able to check out really quickly, and found the language super clear and compelling, then someone has done information architecture work in the background. Conversely, if you've ever gone on a website and gone, oh my gosh, what were they thinking? I cannot find anything here, then that might be needing some information architecture. I hope that answered your question, Frank. No, sorry, that wasn't Frank. It's the questions are
Yeah, it
changing.
was Ivan. Yeah, indeed. So it was Ivan, but I marked it answered already. So I think the next one here is from Nick. Given the
Yeah,
arrival,
AI.
yeah, and mainstream of AI, how would you update your process?
It's funny you should bring that up, Nick, because my work these days is completely focused on AI, or almost completely focused on AI. As you might imagine, I described what information architecture is. So information architecture is being transformed by AI, and information architects have a big role to play in AI, because working with AI effectively requires giving them information, giving the AIs information in very specific ways. Anyway, how the process would change. Well, I touched on one way in which it would change when I was going through the deck, which is I talked about those focusing questions for each chapter. And the focusing questions I came up with when I was structuring the book, right? I was like, well, this first chapter needs to introduce these concepts. And then I was like, well, at the end, after reading this, what questions might the reader have, right? And I would like choose the right question. So that is a process where it would be really helpful to have a third party reading through the copy for chapter 1 in this case, and then proposing the focusing question for chapter 2. And that's something that I would do with an AI, right? Like I would feed drafts of the work to an AI and ask for what might be missing. That's something that I do already, right? Now, I'll also say this up front. One thing I do not recommend doing with AI is having the AI write for you. That defeats the point, I think. Writing is thinking, and you want to think, and do a good job, and you want your humanity to come across. And AIs can do a really good job of summarizing, synthesizing, doing that kind of thing, but they're also pretty dry as writers. But they can help you. They can help you in the editing process. They can help you brainstorming. They can help you not proofreading, but like reading what you've written. You can ask it to point out where things might be unclear, or where you might have left something out. And those are all ways in which AI can support your writing. I hope that answered your question. I'm going to jump to yours. You're talking about that the book is written around Obsidian, but are you using an application? Interesting. Okay, yes. I have used Excalidraw, and I haven't used it extensively, to be fair. I think that they are different tools, okay. So to be fair, I have not used Excalidraw deeply enough to know how it compares to Tinderbox, but I have been using Tinderbox for about 20 years. So I am very familiar with how Tinderbox works. And that's part of the reason why I use it for that. Also, Tinderbox is, I only showed like a tiny, tiny fraction of what it does. It is an incredibly powerful tool that you can use to build all sorts of workflows around. Some people use use it to develop task management systems or CRM systems. And I don't do any of those things when I'm writing. I've used it primarily because it is a good place for me to like dump ideas and reorganize them. But also, I would say this, Ivan, like I talked about switching modalities, and I find that if I try to put all my thinking into one tool, I mean, technically, I could write the book in Obsidian, right? Like Obsidian allows you to, it's a markdown editor, right? And I said I love markdown. So I could technically write a book in Obsidian. And I think I've seen projects where people are like trying to simulate the sort of things you do with Scrivener with Obsidian. But I get a lot of value out of switching tools and just having tools that I use for specific purposes. And there's something about like switching I'm in this tool that has this conceptual model and this user interface, and now I'm switching to work in this other tool. There's something about that transition, that switch of modalities, that unlocks ideas for me. So those are some of the reasons why I do that. I think of Obsidian primarily as a place for me to capture what I'm learning, kind of like do drafts of like ideas that are still emergent, and I think of it as a kind of writing tool in some ways. I don't use, for example, I also don't use the visual graph that Obsidian has. So it's just the way that I use it. Now, Obsidian is a flexible enough tool that you can craft it into your own thing. And if you can do the visual layout thing in Obsidian, more power to you. Frank, I am writing a nonfiction book myself. What advice would you give? Get chapters, rhythm, cadence first okay for like 80%. I'm not entirely clear on that. I'm not entirely clear on what you're asking, but one piece of advice that I would give you is, and again, this is just my particular taste. Like I said, I like books that establish a rhythm where as a reader you can sit down with the book and get a sense of how the chapter is going to unfold, so that you don't have to be thinking about the structure of the book, and you don't have to be thinking about what comes next. I also like books where there's a somewhat consistent word length in chapters, where chapters are somewhat like the word length is somewhat homogeneous. And the way that I picked the word length that I was targeting in my own books was by observing my own preferences as a reader. And I realized I had a commute. I was living at the time in a place in Northern California where I had a commute on BART, the public transit system there. And I liked reading in BART. And I realized that I really enjoyed books. I found like the best balance between ingesting ideas and staying focused, like having enough balance between depth and variety in books that allowed me to read an entire chapter in the length of time that it took for me to go from my home station in BART to my workstation in BART. So I actually I found the books that I had read where that happened, and I did a word count on the chapters on those books, and that's how I determined the target for my own book. So I would say like observe your own preferences, like what do you like as a reader, and then try to emulate that is what I would suggest. Frank, in the process of structuring, do you try out different flows, boards, and number of chapters to see what works or feels good? Yes. That is, like I said, I showed you the screenshots I showed you of Tinderbox already had the chapters laid out. At the beginning, I didn't really know how many chapters there were going to be. I did know more or less the word count for the book, because these were books that I published through Rosenfeld Media, and their books tend to have a certain length, right? And when you sign the contract with a publishing house, you're aiming for a particular range of length. So I knew that this wasn't going to be 100 chapters, right? It was going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of like 9 to 12 chapters or something like that. But I didn't know what the chapters were going to be, how many there were going to be. And that's where that clustering exercise comes in useful in the beginning. And maybe you don't want to start by dumping all your ideas in there. Maybe just like thinking about like, what are the big ideas here? Like, what are the big rocks? And then start laying them out and thinking, like, well, does this deserve to be a chapter? And also, like I mentioned during the presentation, be prepared to switch even late in the process. Like you might, as you start writing, you might have gone through the research, structure, and writing process. And when you get to the writing process, you might like work on this chapter and it ends up being twice as long as you thought it would be. It's like, maybe you can consider like breaking that up into a separate chapter, maybe. And that's where like it's really like, this is a cliche, but people say it's like, well, write the first draft and assume that that's not going to be the one that gets published, right? Like, because that draft is going to tell you what the real book you're going to write is actually going to be. So it's almost like this hurts people when I say this, but it's like a throwaway. It's like what you're doing is like you're getting the ideas out of you so that you can understand what the book is actually going to be. Okay, I don't know how to pronounce your name, Jochen. Can you explain or expand on the concept of a chapter cadence? At what layers do you it keeps moving. At what layers do you apply the cadence? Word, sentence, paragraph, chapter, book. Okay. So what I meant by cadence was, I think of chapters as having sections. And again, this is because I am working on nonfiction. And I am also very cognizant of the fact that I am writing for an audience of people who have been exposed to social media. So we all are different kinds of readers than readers in the 19th century, right? So we take in a lot more content and a lot more varied content that tends to be much shorter. So I tend to think the structure in my mind is the book is going to have chapters. Chapters are going to have sections. Sections are going to have paragraphs. And paragraphs are going to have sentences, obviously. I don't like very long sentences. People have a hard time reading long sentences. I don't like very long paragraphs. I aim for, it used to be that tweets were 140 characters long, I think. I aim for about twice that, but I don't do it, like, I don't have a word count on paragraphs. For me, it's like a visual thing. Like, I can imagine, like, I have my, Ulysses, the Ulysses window. Like, I know, like, if it's starting to go beyond like 5 lines for a paragraph, it's like, this is starting to get long. But that's just because I'm going by what I like, what the kind of text that I find readable, and also because I know the audience, right? Like, people are more short form readers. So I hope that helps. But when I think of, to answer the question specifically, when I think of cadence, I'm thinking sections, right? So the opening section is the story, then there's the idea, then there's the example or the how-to thing. Ed, workshops. I'd like to adapt this to structure and streamline my workshop content. Yes, you can absolutely use this for workshop content. And there is actually a book, and I am going to look it up now because it escapes my... you're calling me out on the spot here. Gosh, what is this book called? Anyway, there's an author who has written a couple of books, and the reason that I'm bringing the reason I am bringing this up is that he's written a book on writing books and a book on writing workshops, and the two books are like, these two books are kind of similar in that they have similar ideas, but that's because I think you're hitting on it, right? Like, these are similar ideas. So the author is Rob Fitzpatrick, and the book on workshops is called The Workshop Survival Guide. And I can highly recommend that. And let me get you the name of Rob's other book. It is called Write Useful Books. That should be memorable. I'm just on the spot and didn't remember it on the spot. Hope that helps. In your experience, do you start out with a topic in mind and start from scratch, or do you at some point realize that you have a certain collection of knowledge and realize this should be a book, or maybe a bit of both? It's a bit of both. And let me tell you how Duly Noted happened. So, because I think that this illustrates the process. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm super experienced with this. I've only worked on 3 books. I mean, there are people who, like, if you hear from someone who's worked on 20 books, then you can start saying, it's like, this person really knows their patterns. But for me, how it works is I do have a kind of vague idea of what I want. And then as I start doing the research and doing the structure, it becomes clear what this thing should be. And in the case of Duly Noted, when I had finished working on Living in Information, which is a book about information architecture, when I had finished working on that book, I was having a conversation with Lou Rosenfeld, my publisher, and he asked us like, "What do you want to, do you have another book in you? What do you want to work on next?" And I said, "Well, I don't know that I want to jump right into it right now, but I would really love to write a book about information architecture, but not for things like websites and apps and stuff like that. Rather, information architecture for your own stuff, because we deal with so much information in our worlds, right?" And I think that the same techniques that apply for architecting websites and stuff like that can also apply for architecting our to-do lists and our email inboxes and all these things. That was the genesis of the idea, and I actually started a podcast to do research for that book. I started this Informed Life podcast to interview people about how they manage their personal information. And as I talked with people and as I read up more on the subject, it became clear to me that that was too broad a subject to tackle in a book, especially a book of the kind of Rosenfeld media page count. It's different if it's going to be like a huge academic multi-volume tone thing. But for a book of this kind, like, it needed to be more focused. And I think it was in conversations with Lou or with Marta, our editor. I don't remember how it happened, but we honed it down to like, maybe it's just about note taking. Maybe it's not about everything. Like, let's not talk about to-do lists and calendars and email. Let's just focus on this note taking bit. And it just so happened that the writing process coincided to a time when things like Rome Research came out and Obsidian came out. So there was a lot of interest growing in that space. So that's how that happened. How do you move from notes, visuals to the document, content in paragraphs, etc.? I'm more often than not, I don't migrate things over. I will take a fresh tab in the word processor. Meaning, if I've done, if I showed you Tinderbox, I have the little sticky note and I can click on it and write some notes in the body of the note. Where I elaborate the ideas, and those will be very high level. They'll be outlines more often than not. I won't take those and copy them verbatim into Ulysses. Instead, I'll keep the note in one window and I'll have the Ulysses window open, and I'll start writing it out, trying to make it more conversational and more engaging for the reader. Any helpful techniques to filter the most interesting ideas, like card sorting or other IA techniques? Wow, that's a big question. Yes, there are ways to do that. I mentioned when I showed the photo of the jigsaw puzzle that you often don't know if you have the pieces for a single puzzle on the table. And what I meant by that is there is a lot that gets left in the cutting room floor, as the movie people say, right? There were a lot of ideas that I researched for Duly Noted that didn't make it into the book. And what I've done with both of those books, with Living in Information and Duly Noted, is I'll blog about what I'm writing about. And some of the ideas that didn't make it into the book actually make it into my blog. So it's not like any of it gets wasted. But as far as like information architecture techniques, I think it's more about trying to make sure that you are doing right by the reader, right? Like, you don't want to get everything in there. You really want to understand who you're writing for. And this is something that was really painful to me at the beginning, but I came to see the wisdom of it. Like when we were working on the proposal for Living in Information, which was the first net new book that I worked on, Lou insisted that I fill out this form where one of the questions was like, who's the audience for this book? And your temptation as an author is going to be like, well, everyone should care about this book, right? Like, this is going to be interesting to everybody. That's going to make, if that's the approach you're taking, that's going to make it really difficult for you to work on the book, because you're not going to be able to imagine the kinds of questions that the reader is going to have and the level of expertise, know-how, awareness of the issues that your reader is going to have. So when I was working on Duly Noted, I assumed that the reader was someone who was mildly interested in the PKM space, right? Like if this is maybe a person who had heard about Obsidian, and mind you, this was about 3 or 4 years ago that I started working on that book. So it was right around the time when Obsidian was first coming out. So if a person has heard of one of these tools and is already considering them, they're already in a mental space where they're thinking, it's like, this might be useful for me, right? So there's a lot that you don't have to explain if you assume that it's a person like that. So I'm not assuming it's like, this is for everybody. Now, I do have to assume like maybe this person has never seen a tool like this. So I have to like compare them with something like Apple Notes, which they might be more familiar with, right? Oh my gosh, curious what the chapter word count was. I don't remember. I can open Ulysses and see if I can pull it up. 2,500 words. No, that was the introduction, which was shorter. 5,000 words for the chapters. All right, what else? Assuming that in the structuring phase, you have identified what you miss based on the rhythm you designed for each chapter. How would you look for story, anecdote, especially in AI times? Would you trust AI to help you with it? Yeah, that's a good one. I suspect AI could be helpful, but with the caveat that I worked on these books before, before ChatGPT, at least at that stage in the process. What ends up happening, at least to me, but I suspect this is true for other people, I forget the name of it, but you know this phenomenon where you're thinking of buying a particular brand of car, and then you suddenly start seeing that model everywhere, right? Like this is kind of like, I think it's like familiarity bias or something like that, where like something is top of mind for you. So all of a sudden you start, you start seeing instances of it out in the world. So something like that happens with these structures. Like if you know that chapter 2 is about this particular subject, and you want to open it with a story, but you haven't come across the perfect story yet, if you know that you need a story to illustrate that idea, and you just keep that in the back of your mind, as you go about your daily life, stories will start coming to you. It's like you'll be watching the news and you'll be like, hey, that could work. That could be that could be the opening story for this thing. So that's kind of what happened. That's what kind of what happened to me. I'll give you an example. So the introduction to the book, I needed a story, and as I was working on that, I came across a story about a heist involving Charles Darwin's notebooks. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so perfect. Anyway, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but that was a story that just popped up in my newsfeed, and I just so happened to be looking for a story to open the book, and it just clicked. But it's because I was looking for it. I had it in mind that I needed a story.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we are coming up to the end of our time. I think maybe one last question. So there's 1 minute for one more, but then we need to wrap up.
Yeah. So where did you? Let's take the top one there. Where did you waste most time getting to completion? One of the caveats with the modality switching thing, and I'll say this as people like, I suspect there's a lot of folks familiar with Obsidian here. Those of us who like to explore tools like Obsidian are prone to procrastinating by trying out tools and techniques. And that can be a hindrance. So I said, I started with Tinderbox, and I've switched to Freeform, and I've tried Scrivener, and I've used Ulysses. What I didn't mention is that I wrote significant parts of Duly Noted using Emacs, which I've also used a lot. I didn't want to go there because Emacs is another rabbit hole, right? I find it valuable to switch modalities, but just be careful because you could end up spending a lot of time doing what I call meta work, which is working on the things that let you work. and that is time that is going to be eating into your actual writing time. So that's the caveat there.
Awesome. Jorge, this was super interesting. Thank you for spending the time. One question that comes up.
I appreciate the invitation. So.
Yeah, one question that interestingly didn't come up this time, but if you're willing to share your slides, then I can make it available under Docs. If not, that's also okay. I leave it to you. But if yes, then and you send it to me, then I'll upload it to the event document section and people can.
Absolutely, I'll send you a PDF
as reference. Awesome. So,
yep.
Thank you for accepting the invitation. Thank you for sharing your insights. It was super interesting. I learned a lot and come away with lots of questions and to-dos and follow-up. So appreciate your time. Thank you all, and see you in the next session. The next session is going to be super interesting because we'll have two people. We'll have Jono Hay and Oliver Caviglioli here. And Oliver is going to take live notes while Jono is talking, and so it's going to be two parts of the session. But anyway, thank you. See you in the next one. And that's all for today.
You wanna drop a book, but your notes look a mess. Got the abstract vision under too much stress. I'm Jorge Arango, the architect's the guide with structures and maps. Nowhere to hide. This ain't just a memo, it's a knowledge garden plot. Externalize the chaos, give it everything you got. You think it's all clutter? Nah, we see the gold. It's time to build a framework, strong, brave, and bold. Get off the linear scroll, man, that stuff's too slow. We sequence the arguments, watch the clarity flow. It's the title track, the main instruction, feel the mental groove. How I write my books, yeah, watch the project move. No more confusion, the message is precise. You see visual structures that help you think. That's the guarantee. Check the blueprint, duly noted is the case. 3 simple rules to set your writing pace. 1, make them short, keep your notes atomic. 2, connect the dots, get the link economic. 3, nurture the network, watch the insights bloom. Use your axes and grids, clear out the abstract gloom. From messy raw capture to the final manuscript line. We shape the scope, the sequence, the design. Notes, outline, manuscript. We got the workflow light, so grab the mic and get your whole book right. Get off the linear scroll, man, that stuff's too slow. We sequence the arguments, watch the clarity flow. It's the title track, the main instruction, feel the mental groove. How I write my books, yeah, watch the project move. No more confusion, the message is precise. You see visual structures that help you think. That's the guarantee. Word. You heard the architect. Now go design your piece. AA is the rhythm, bringing you creative peace. Word.